Arvind Iyer has a research background in computational neuroscience and biomedical engineering in areas ranging from decoding of single neuron responses to analysis of autonomic measures in immersive virtual reality settings. His interests as an independent researcher include Indian languages, appreciation of classical performing arts, and contemplative practices. Take it away, Arvind. 20 minutes.
Thank you. Am I visible and are my slides, am I audible and my slides visible?
You're audible, you're visible, and your slides are visible to me.
Wonderful. Om Tat Sat. This presentation on the Nyāyaśāstra ethics of debate begins with a summary of how unethical debating practice is identified in the Nyayasutra. Debating malpractices termed as Chala, Jati, and Nigrahasthana are presented in the Nyayasutra in a complex and intricate classification. However mind-boggling the classification might be, the underlying purpose throughout is to protect ideas as expressed by a debater from distortion and misrepresentation. Fairness to ideas is thus facilitated by being aware of and avoiding these debate malpractices. I will present illustrations of how knowledge of these debate malpractices can help us spot flaws during arguments within a fictional scenario based on a real-world topic of immense social and legal interest, the essential religious practice test. Along with fairness to ideas, fairness to people is also a concern throughout the Nyayasutra, both in the sense of transactional fairness during debate and in the sense of the ultimate human good, the Parama Purushartha, as it is understood in this philosophical system. Finally, I will discuss future directions of studies in the Nyāyaśāstra ethics of debate in academia, jurisprudence, and civil society at large. In the Nyayasutra, the characteristic of good debate and good reasoning is general, is that the goal should be ascertainment of truth about the nature of an object. Bad debate or debate malpractice is therefore any practice that is indifferent to the ascertainment of truth and concerned only with securing victory in debate. Such a malpractice mentioned early in the Nyayasutra is Chala. This is an attempt to contradict a statement by assuming a meaning of a term different from the intended meaning. Vachana Vighata Artha Vikalpopapatya Chalam. There are multiple variants of Chala, but they all involve opportunistically disregarding the standard relation between a name and a thing and making this the pretext of an invalid objection. Another malpractice, Jati, is an attempt to introduce controversy in a sound argument by bringing up any sort of similarity or dissimilarity between things. Sadharmya Vaidharmyabhyam Pratyavasthanam Jati. There are again multiple variants of Jati, as many as 24, but there is a shared feature across them. An invalid objection is raised by conflating the object in the original claim with another object that is similar in some arbitrary respects. Nigrahasthana is a broad category including varied situations that amount to failure in a debate. Failures of reasoning, failures of articulation, failures in following the correct argument format, and failures in staying committed to the stated position. The classification of Nigrahasthanas is done in a more economical way in a treatise called the Vada Nyaya by the Buddhist logician Dharmakirti. According to Dharmakirti, two types specified in the Nyayasutra itself are sufficient to cover the situations in all other Nigrahasthanas of the Nyayasutra. These are Hetvabhasa, or fallacious reasoning, and Apratibha, or lack of ingenuity to reply. The word idea in this presentation is used to refer to any belief or claim stated by a person, regardless of whether it is physically true or false, and whether it seems desirable or undesirable. Accordingly, fairness to an idea during debate requires that an idea held by a person must be represented without mischaracterization. and protected especially against being mistaken for another idea. Consider the classic Nyāyaśāstra example of a statement. This hill has fire on it. This is a statement of the form, a certain object has a certain property. Raising objections to such a statement according to Nyaya principles demands at a minimum that the object and property intended by the speaker are not mistaken for other objects or properties. To the statement, the hill has fire on it, let's assume that an objector says, but there are underwater hills also. Such an objection disregards how the object intended by the original speaker is a particular hill on land, and not hills in general, and not all objects that have a hill-like shape. Resort to chala or jati by objectors often amounts to misidentifying the object or property in the original statement. Moving on from the classic textbook example, let us now see a few examples of how ideas are distorted by chala and jati in the following fictional scenario. In a town called Nyāyaśāstra, there is a temple which since time immemorial allows entry only to those who are able to complete a ritual called Abhyasa Pramana, involving a series of physical exercises at the entrance. This practice has been criticized in some circles as being exclusionary to those unable to perform Abhyasa Pramana and lacking counterparts in any major temple of the same faith elsewhere. The examples of statements and objections that we will see can be imagined as occurring in diverse settings, like an argument among friends, a television studio debate, or as part of proceedings in a court of law. Suppose an adherent of the tradition of the Nyāyaśāstra temple says, at the Nyāyaśāstra temple, the Abhyasa Pramana ritual is a compulsory requirement for entry. Suppose now that an objector asks, how can you say that only people who are able to perform a difficult physical exercise can worship at temples? This objection can be criticized as follows. The object in the original statement is the Nyāyaśāstra temple, and not all temples, like the reaction assumes. Assuming a statement to apply to an entire class when only a particular instance of a class is meant amounts to a variety of chala called samanya chala. Suppose now that an adherent of the tradition of the Nyāyaśāstra temple says, the Abhyasa Pramana ritual as a compulsory requirement for entry at the Nyāyaśāstra temple is an essential religious practice on account of being followed throughout known history. Suppose now that an objector asks, which important sacred text specifies that this entry requirement is essential? This objection can be criticized as follows. In the original statement, the status of essential religious practice is claimed for the Abhyasa Pramana ritual on account of having the property of being followed throughout history. The reaction assumes an additional property, namely mention in an important sacred text, which other objects, that is rituals, assumed to be similar to the original object, that is Abhyasa Pramana, happen to have. This amounts to a variety of jati called Utkarsha Sama. We will now return from our trip to the temple town of Nyāyaśāstra to where we are. Besides fairness to ideas in Nyāyaśāstra ethics, another part of this study is fairness to people. We can have the following intuitive working definition. Fairness to a person is upheld through pursuit of the greatest good of that person, according to the established understanding, in a manner consistent with impartial application of the relevant laws. At the level of individual debate, applying the Nyayasutra principles of fairness to ideas also amounts to giving each participant a fair hearing. Fairness to people is also conceptualized at a level beyond any individual debate in terms of how any conduct facilitates the greatest human good, the summum bonum, Nishreyasa as it is called in Nyāyaśāstra. In the Nyaya view, this ultimate good is attained by true knowledge, debate is but one of the means of attaining true knowledge, and adherence to rules of debate is not an end in itself. In exceptional situations where loss in a debate can hinder the overall pursuit of true knowledge, the Nyayasutra allows resorting to malpractices for victory in the larger interest of truth-seeking. Like thorny fences can protect seedlings. Tatvadhyavasaya samrakshanartham jalpa vitande bija praroha samrakshanartham kantaka shakhavarana, which is the Nyayasutra relevant to this. In the Vada Nyaya, Dharmakirti rejects such exceptions made with respect to debate malpractice in the Nyayasutra. It can be beneficial to take such a multi-level view of fairness in the context of the modern judiciary as well. Fairness at the transactional level of due process in individual cases is an obvious requirement. Fairness at a larger systemic level in serving public welfare is also an important consideration, especially regarding system-wide issues not reducible to any single case, like judicial delays and the strain on judicial schedules by public interest litigations and the like. Throughout in the Nyayasutra portions on debating ethics, we do not find obvious commandments like don't shout or don't use unparliamentary language. We also do not find explicit mentions of a judge or a moderator for policing debates. The Nyayasutra, therefore, has an expectation of a requisite level of maturity and self-cultivation on part of debaters. The ethos is one of self-regulation. The Nyayasutra of the Nyaya school, which is an Astika school, and the Vada Nyaya by a Buddhist author, Dharmakirti, both operate within the same fundamental methodological framework of Vada Vidya, or the science of dialectics. This is a reminder that academic study of Indian dialectics and Indic philosophies in general must be unshackled from obsolete assumptions about different Astika and Nastika schools being irrevocably opposed and developing their methods in isolation. An area of research in Nyāyaśāstra at the intersection of dialectics and metaphysics is to study how the principles of dialectics laid out in the Nyayasutra can be seen applied within the Nyayasutra itself in those portions of the text that present metaphysical arguments with refutations of objections of rival schools. As we heard in the previous talk, current judicial and academic scholarship on application of Mimamsa principles to jurisprudence has an emphasis on the Vakya element of the classic Pada-Vakya Pramana framework of Shastra studies. This can be complemented and augmented by scholarship on the application of Nyaya principles to judicial processes, with an emphasis on the Pramana element as well. Finally, even outside of academia, with an increasing trend in availability and circulation and even live streaming of legal judgments of national importance, an aware citizen will benefit from familiarity with such Nyaya tools to critically read these judgments. Thank you for the opportunity, and with that, I'll be glad to take any questions. Om Tat Sat.
Well structured. Thanks, Arvind. And since Arvind is finished within his 20 minutes time, if there are any questions, let's take that right now. Okay, so Arvind, I will proceed. If any other questions come up in the chat box, maybe you should respond to it there.
Definitely.
Yeah.